Thanks for joining us all. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Lee Biggenden. I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Nephos Technologies. So big thank you for joining us. We are also joined by Andy Hardy from Nasuni and Lee Gorton from the Saltaire Brewery, and I'll introduce them in a bit. And what we're looking to do today in today's session is talk through a little bit about, we're going to give you a little bit of an introduction into Nephos, who we are, what we do, why we do it. I'm going to hand over to Andy, who is from Nasuni, and he's going to walk you through the Nasuni proposition, if you like, but with a slightly different twist, with some cheerses, I think. We're going to have a little break, slight intermission for an intermediary tasting. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how we're supporting our customers in kind of making changes to their infrastructure to enable these kinds of things. And then we're going to kick over to Lee to close it out with the rest of the walkthrough of the things that aren't cannabis that we sent you. So that's the plan. If you've got questions, throw them up on the chat, and we'll tackle them as we go. But if not, sit back and enjoy. Before I start boring you with slides, Lee, probably worth you just mentioning to the guys what can they drink now?
Well, I mean, you can drink whatever you want, guys. I'm only here to advise and inform, but we always start with Saltaire Blonde. So, you know, I know we've all got very important business to attend to here, and I know I'm just the light relief, but it's good to be here all the same. And basically, just now, I'm here to say it is okay to start drinking now. It's pretty cruel to put a load of beer in front of people at 4 o'clock in a pandemic, and you know, with all of the hard week's work, and not let you drink it. So it's completely fine. We always start with a blonde. Crack that open if you so wish. Hopefully you've had them in the fridge and got them cold. If you've not, pop them in now. If you have got them in the fridge, take them out.
I'll just be back in a second. Hang on.
Here he goes. He's off. He's fully with us, isn't he? So, you know, cold but not too cold. A couple of glasses, guys. Bottle opener is always welcome. And then, as you've mentioned, we're going to talk you a little bit later on through the strange looking packages that come with it. So thanks very much for having us on. I think we're going to pass back to Lee now, but we'll get on with the blonde. We'll taste this properly in the intermission, tell you a bit about the brewery and stuff, and then later on we'll give you a proper brewery tour, teach you how to drink beer, whatever it is you want. So basically, the more interaction from you lot, the better. If pop anything into the chat, we can do this in 1,000 different ways. We'll try a few of the beers, and you can tell me what you want to know about the brewing industry. That sound all right for now, Lee?
Wonderful, thank you very much. So give you a quick intro to us first into Nephos. Some of you may have heard us, some of you may not. We are a data services integrator, basically. So what does that actually mean? Well, we help our customers to solve complex data problems. That's in essence what we do. Very consulting led in our approach. So a lot of the work that we end up doing is helping our customers kind of navigate from where they are today to where they're trying to get to in terms of data strategy. And that strategy could be storage related, so data processing and storage and protection. It could be related to AI and ML. It could be related to data governance. They tend to be the three areas of work that we focus our time on. But ultimately, it's to try and help our customers to make the right decisions about their infrastructure, right? And to drive more value from their data. Now, as a business, we've been going for a little over 8 years now. And in more recent times, our growth has been quite extreme. So we've just been recognized on the FT 1000 as one of the fastest growing companies in Europe. based on our revenue growth. So we've hit a little over 700% compound in the last 3 years. Our customer retention is extremely high compared to most. And we kind of put that down to the fact that we're 100% data focused. Like, we care about the data. We want to make sure that we're helping you drive that value from it. And when we started as a business, we kind of left a lot of the legacy technology stack behind as a result of that, predominantly because we felt it wasn't really built for the times that people were moving towards. So how do we engage our customers? There's kind of 3 layers to what we do. The initial phase of a lot of engagements is around consulting services. So in the storage world or in the infrastructure world, there's 2 here that are kind of relevant. One is around our smart data storage service. So that's all about helping you understand and develop an infrastructure strategy to support the business, really. And the other is around smart file assessment. So that's all around getting better profile and better understanding over your data sets, your unstructured data sets. And then using that to inform your strategy. So, you know, it's very, very easy to build an infrastructure strategy if you don't know what you've got in some ways, because you can make it anything you want. What we try to do is apply some data about the data to that strategy to make it more relevant. It's a bit like the big yellow box thing. When you move house, you don't want to take everything with you. So we look to try and identify areas where we can clean up before then. We deliver solutions off the back of that. So we have a team, an engineering and PMO team here on board at Nephos, and they're really there to help deliver on those projects once the strategy is decided. And it might be you already know what your strategy is, you just need help implementing. And they're, as I say, in 3 core areas. So data processing and storage, governance and compliance, and then data services. So more AI, ML related activities. Once we've done that, we then work with our customers to go anywhere from kind of preventative maintenance services all the way through to fully managed. And that's in general our model. Now, we don't believe that it should be as prescriptive as that. So we look to make sure that our customers have choice over that infrastructure and that approach. It's not all managed service or nothing. So our whole ethos really is to work with you guys to try and make sure you get the right answer for you rather than the only one we've got on the truck. And that's been really successful for us. We've been, like I say, working in this space for about 8 years now. Within your industry sets, we've got the likes of Stepnell, who are one of the oldest construction companies in the country. Atkins, WSP, 2 of the largest engineering organizations. Scott Brown Rigger, one of the oldest architectural firms. And all of those guys we've worked with around, in fact, the subject area that we're talking about today, right? How do we enable global collaboration or collaboration on our BIM workloads, on our 3D CAD workloads, and how do we improve that for people? And in a lot of cases, it comes down to helping improve billable hours, right? As well. So that, as I say, is kind of the very, very short version of what we do with our customers. If we look in the market, and if we look at what people are saying generally, just to give a bit of context before I hand over to Andy, we've got a lot of stakeholders in the business, right? We've got our CIO. You know, there's a lot of organizations, particularly over the past 18, 24 months, have got a massive agenda to move to cloud, right? So how do we move our services to cloud? How do we enable more mobile working? And how do we get better control over our cost base? It's often what's being driven down from the CIO at the moment. You know, let's reduce our costs. Let's try and be more efficient. Let's shut data centers. All of these things are kind of in the mix. We've got the BIM side of things generally. You know, we want to enable access to our BIM files from various locations. We want to drive efficiency over the ways that we work. and we do that through collaboration. We've got the IT side of the house. So how do we reduce costs? How do we consolidate infrastructure? How do we simplify management? These kind of aspects. Similarly with engineering, we want to share project files across locations. We want to speed up that time to value out of our data. And very similarly with the project side as well, we want to share more of our data both internally and externally. These things are driving really a lot of the reasoning behind looking at technologies like Nasuni, right? That cost control, the enable to collaborate, and the simplification of management. And I guess really when you look at what most people are being forced to do regardless is do more, faster, and make it cheaper. Quite a challenge for people generally, I would say. You look at the storage space, it's even more of a challenge. We've got this kind of conflict of interest really over what our infrastructure looks like. At the top end, we've got some really high performance stuff. So we've got our all flash arrays and our SANs, and we do some work in this space around the HPC side where it's all NVMe, it's all flash, it's super high performance, it's parallel file system, all of those good things. But really, that has a really significantly high cost to get deployed and running, and it can be quite complicated as well, very difficult to scale. But it has the performance level that you need for those high-end applications. You come down the stack a little bit and you've got more traditional NAS. It's lower cost than all flash and those performance workloads. And it's traditionally been designed for file. And then you've got your objects and your cloud storage. Great for unstructured data, chocolate teapot for anything structured, but it's super cheap and super scalable. And at the moment, or as the way things have been, people have had to choose, right? You have to make a choice between, all flash or NAS, or you have to choose to deploy multiple infrastructures across the piece for these things. When actually, we think there's a better way. We think there's a better way that combines performance and capacity to match those characteristics. When we look at the infrastructure itself as well, typically quite complex, various different pockets of resource, data protection schemas and whatnot. And quite often that architecture, that traditional architecture, leads us to store anywhere up to 5-6x the amount of data than you actually need. And that kind of inefficiency can really put a burden on management time, management cost, and general budget. So again, this is where we're looking to drive some efficiencies. We look to drive people towards more of a two-tier architecture, if you like. So we want to leverage the benefits we get of object storage. So the scale, the breadth. So if you look at AWS S3, if you look at Azure Blob, GCP Nearline, or any of the traditional kind of on-premise object platforms like a Scality or a Cloudian, we look to leverage objects as a tier that we can drive multiple use cases in. So rather than have all of these pockets, what we want to do is push all of our data into an object store, and we just want to present it in different ways. So actually what we're doing is rather than have take backup and off-siting, we want to converge our backup and use object storage as our long-term retention for that. Very good for the VM side of things. For our file data, we want to leverage technology like Nasuni to push into that object here. So our users get standard SMB and FS access like they've always had, but they get, from an IT perspective, you get the scale and the cost benefit of leveraging object storage. We do something similar around HPC. So we look to really flatten that down and simplify the data protection schema, and lower the cost in the process. Now, one of the things that we do here, and this is why we're joined by the team at Nasuni, is that we leverage edge caching quite heavily to feed that file data into an object storage tier. And that's really what Andy's going to talk to you about now.
it. All right, good. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Andy Hardy. I've been in the storage industry for about 30 years. Right now, I'm Vice President of Sales here at Nasuni for Europe. I've done various roles in storage. I used to buy it. I was one of NetApp's early customers back in the day. I used to be IT director of one of the global banks back in the 90s. Then the bank asked me, where should we invest our money? I said, we should invest it in storage because everyone needs to buy more of it. So I spent half a dozen or so years investing in storage companies. And then I ended up getting involved in storage startups, and one of those was bought by Dell. So in the on-premise storage world, I was a leader of Dell storage here in Europe for a number of years. And then, of course, we saw things start to move to the cloud. So for the last half dozen or so years, I've been here at Nasuni and growing a business that's based around cloud storage. Nasuni's headquartered in the States. We manage oceans of storage, about 150 petabytes now, I think we're up to, for hundreds and hundreds of customers globally. And a lot of those are architecture, engineering, and construction companies. Excuse me. And so I'll focus a little bit on some examples of that today. I will touch on the collaboration piece, but really what I'm going to focus on today is what we see as some of the really stupid things about file storage, NAS in particular, and how it's been done historically. Not stupid because the people buying it are stupid, but stupid because there's better ways now, and I'd be happy to share some of that with you. I'd also love to know what you think. Do you agree that there's a need for change? Do you agree that the cloud can help? Does the cloud play a role in your strategy today? Or do you disagree with the 5 things that we've chosen here? And it maybe think that they're probably other more stupid things, or perhaps you don't think these things are stupid at all. So with that, 5 things that I think are stupid, I'm going to say cheers for each one. So cheers to all of you for the first one, which is really to do with running out of disk space. For many of us, this has been the only way to manage file storage with a finite fixed capacity per location. But here we are in 2021. There are better options thanks to the cloud. Now, for years when I was buying storage, I just took it as read that if I had 100 terabytes more than I needed in Paris, but I was run out of space in Luxembourg, too bad. I just got to buy more space in Luxembourg. But that is not the way things go now. And we can expand on demand, not have to buy that extra shelf, etc. So we'll get into some of that in a minute. So here's cheers to the second thing that I think is stupid, which is it's 2021 and you still need to make a separate backup copy. So I've got my 100 terabytes or whatever it is of files. I've got all the overheads that go with that. I've possibly got a replica of that. Now I'm at 250 or so terabytes, and I'm going to make backup after backup after backup of that data as well. And most of that will never change. And frankly, it'll be quite slow and time consuming to respond to recover from. So we're not sure that's the best way to go either. You'll probably also have off-site copies on perhaps some old LTO versions that you maybe can't even restore from anymore. We've recently had people struggling with that problem. Here's cheers to issue number 3, and I will take a sip this time. Yeah. Having spent all that time and effort on making DR replicas and backup copies, etc., it can take longer to restore files than get vaccinated. Now, hats off to the marketing department for that quip. We actually ran this presentation the first time before we'd all been vaccinated. I'm getting my second vaccine on Monday, so you can guess my age. I'm just about to turn 60. So, but hopefully you get the point. Recovery has been the Achilles heel of the whole process of backup and recovery and archive. And horror stories abound of images taking days to rebuild and recover from the cloud or other backup media. For one of our customers, not so long ago, Pernod Ricard, they make alcohol, but not beer. They do other kinds of alcohol. It took them 3 business days to rebuild their NetApp filer after an outage, actually at their office in Amsterdam. And then it took them that long to pull the data back from the cloud where it was backed up. Well, that's because there was this much data. You've got to restore all of it, and the bandwidth is only this much. So you can do the maths on that. The business, however, wasn't too happy with three business days of downtime. We think that it doesn't need to be like that anymore, and we'll show you a path to instant recovery without actually having to make separate backup copies. We'll get into that. Here's cheers to complexity, number 4. I'm going to be falling off my chair by the end of this, Lee, so I'm not sure this was the best idea, but I'll keep going. So the luxury of dedicated backup admins and storage admins might not be practical for everyone. I certainly had an army of people in the investment bank, but IT these days requires everyone to manage more and to be able to do it remotely. Having to integrate primary NAS, secondary backup DR robo sites and all the rest of it with your WAN infrastructure and more has created just a hugely complex and expensive solution, which really becomes an extra job, if you like. What you really should be doing is focusing on running your business, not running your backup and recovery and your storage. And then lastly, here's the 5th cheers, and I'm still standing or sitting. And that's cost. I think cost is the elephant in the room. All of this costs too much. It's not just about the cost, though. It's also about the time it takes. You may not have time to manage it, and all that leaves the business at risk. What if you haven't tested your backups and testing that they're working and your recovery process, and you can only find out that they're not up to it after you've suffered the ransomware attack or whatever it might be? We feel like all of this can, with the benefit of cloud technologies, be integral and reduce your cost by about half. And we'll show you why that would be as well. Now, this slide always does this to me, and it likes to go through it twice. So I'm going to pop over to the next slide if I can. There we go. So why are things so stupid, I hear you cry? Well, more than anything, we think that enterprise file storage has simply become too complex and way more expensive than it needs to be. So this is inherent in legacy global file storage architecture, which is typically seen in enterprise environments. Like if you look at the example we got here, there's going to be primary storage typically. So that might be for files, for unstructured data, which by the way is 80–90% of the data that most businesses store. There's going to be perhaps standalone NAS or Windows file servers in front of a SAN or something of that order. There's also going to be secondary storage for the backup side of things using a range of different technologies. There's going to be media servers, there's going to be software, there's going to be targets for those to back up to. There's going to be like mini-me versions of this in your remote offices and branch offices if you're that kind of distributed business, as well as all the offsite DR and offsite backup and some expensive WAN and WAN acceleration, etc., to tie it all together. This whole picture, I believe, is way too complex. Each one of these things is going to run out of capacity, so it's all constrained. It's all going to be end of life at some point. So we're getting that endless migration cycle that happens once every 3 or 4, or is it 5 years in your environment. And therefore, all this is not only time consuming and costly to manage, slow to recover and all the rest of it, it's really expensive, much more so than it needs to be. And it's a pig for collaboration. I have to copy whole projects from location A to location B, and that takes a lot of time. And therefore, doesn't really serve businesses today who expect, I think our users, our architects and engineers and designers expect that when they come to work, things are going to work kind of like they do at home on the internet. Things just turn up when they need to turn up. So there is an alternative. And here at Nasuni, we believe that enterprise file storage really can be a lot simpler than what we've seen hitherto. And we have been doing this for 12 years now. We partner with the world's largest hyperscalers. We do a ton of business with Amazon, Microsoft, Google. We do also work with those on-prem object storage vendors as well that Lee mentioned before. And what we do is we combine a couple of different elements of our technology. One is a file system, which is built for object storage. And the huge benefit of being able to use object storage as the underlying media for our file system, which we call UniFS, that's why we're called Nasuni, NAS and UniFS, Nasuni. The huge benefit is we inherit the properties of that underlying object storage. It's low cost, it's incredibly robust. You can get 16 nines of durability. I couldn't build that in data centers that I was building back in the day. And it's also available anywhere and globally, and we can expand it on demand. And all of those are properties that we can inherit by putting a file system on top of that. However, if I just had my files in the cloud, I would introduce a fresh problem, which is that of latency and performance. So we combine this global file system, which, by the way, has an infinite number of recovery points built into the file system. That's because we're not constrained like a Windows file system or a NetApp file system that sits in a box historically. But we combine that with edge appliances, which we give for free. We charge the file system per terabyte, and we give these edge appliances, they're virtual. You run them in Hyper-V or VMware or Nutanix, or you run them in the cloud. And these are, without explaining to you here how it works, one of my engineers, Mark Connolly, is on the call. He can explain later if you're really interested. But essentially what these do is they pretend to be a Windows file server, and they're a machine for absorbing latency. It's an intelligent caching technology. And if you haven't used it before, you might not believe it, but what actually happens is there could be petabytes in your file storage in the cloud, but at any of your offices, whether you've got 2 or 2,000, the users will see the entire file system, but it will perform like it's all local, because we know what really to keep local to the users. And some other advantages we get from this architecture is it means that we can make changes move around the world far more quickly, because we only need to move the deltas. We have ways of synchronizing the changes and handling things like global file locking as well, which I'll touch on later. So this approach means that we are able to unify, hence UniFS, the primary file storage, the backup. We can do instant recovery from those files. We can go back to any previous point in time very rapidly. That's great for mitigating the effects of ransomware, for example. There's built-in DR. It takes only minutes to keep people working if you've lost the hardware in any particular node. Long story to explain how we do that, but that's certainly what we're able to pull off with this architecture. So in the next few slides, I'd like to take you through how this approach to cloud file storage architecture impacts those 5 issues that we've identified. From here on, cheersing on each of those 5 is optional. I'm not sure I can keep going with the cheerses at this point, but I'm happy for you to. So we've talked about capacity, complexity, backup, restore, and most importantly, costs. So I'll just step through those now. So first of all, just thinking about capacity. Historically, we'd always run out of something, whether it was the file storage terabyte capacity, the snapshot space, or some other overheads, or perhaps the number of users, number of locations, number of sites. There was all these constraints, and those constraints historically stemmed from a box which had a finite number of connectors and therefore a finite number of shelves and drives that I could connect together, and they each had to have reserve space for perhaps snapshot reserves or whatever it might be. Because we're using object storage as the underlying technology, and it can expand on demand, and it's incredibly cheap and incredibly robust, and it can be replicated globally and all that, it means that we don't have to have those kind of limits, like a table space that says how many snapshots I can have, for example, in the file system. So whereas historically I might have had limited disk space, we now can give unlimited capacity. I think my biggest customer in London has 13.5 petabytes of files stored with us globally, for example. That's actually one of Lee's customers that we've done that deal with. That's Omnicom Media Group. Historically, there would have been limits in a traditional physical storage array for the number and size of files and volumes and directories that I could address, if you like, and of course that's unlimited for us as well. Now, some of those constraints might not matter to you, but if you think about snapshots, historically there could be 16 or 32 or something like that. If I have an infinite number of recovery points, and if I can go instantaneously back to how a file used to look before, because we've just got to change pointers in a file system, and I can present that to users where they need them and when they need them, well, that means I don't need a separate backup system. And that's precisely what we do at Nasuni. It's a huge way that we save money for customers and deliver better SLAs, much more rapid RPOs and RTOs than are achievable otherwise. I could go through other limits, number of locations, number of users. None of these things are inherently limited in our approach. We actually don't charge more for additional sites or additional users either. So that's capacity. Turning now to complexity, let me give you an example of one of those legacy architectures. Some of you might be familiar with NetApp, which is now available in the cloud. And that's a technology called Cloud Volumes on Tap, for example. And it basically takes that historical design of a NetApp's file system that worked on-prem and lets you lift and shift that or run it in the cloud. Now, the problem with this approach is that both the limitations, for example, the volume size limits, a limited number of snapshots, et cetera, and the complexity, the need to integrate multiple technologies, each with its own console, required to deliver what we can provide in a single solution with a global namespace, unified and fully integrated primary backup and DR. Well, in this example, with that set of NetApp technologies, you would need 7 different tools to be combined together to do what we can do with the integrated, the unified backup, recovery, file synchronization, etc., built in inherently in this cloud file system with the edge appliances. Just moving now to backup, DR, and restore. I'll tick a couple of boxes at once here. With the Nasuni approach and by leveraging the public cloud that underlies or private cloud object storage that underlies our technology, you don't require a separate copy of your file data for backup or DR purposes. We leverage the infinite and low cost capacity of object storage, globally replicated if you want, highly durable, like I mentioned, can be up to 16 nines depending on which vendor and price point you choose, to implement an infinite number of immediately available recovery points. You can think of this as infinite snapshots sort of built in at no extra cost. And this enables customers to get better SLAs, RPOs and RTOs, as I mentioned, than they could typically achieve with separate backup copies and DR replicas for file data. I hope you forgive me if I take a sip of beer. So this means that individual files can be recovered to any global location within minutes. And you can readily mitigate the impact of ransomware by rapidly recovering to a point in time just before the encryption event, for example. And should you lose the hardware at a given location, users can rapidly recover from disaster and access their files within minutes without having to wait for a full rebuild, as that Pernod Ricard example I touched on before. And then the last elephant in the room was cost. So, what does it really cost? Well, I've touched on that we charge per terabyte per year. What we charge for is usable terabytes, the actual files you need to store. But we replace several things that people typically use today. Their DR infrastructure, their backup infrastructure, which would be the software, the media servers, file sync and WAN infrastructure, and the primary storage itself. We replace that with 2 things: the object storage, which can be incredibly cheap now, and incredibly robust, as I mentioned, and the global file system that we provide together with those edge appliances. That will typically halve the hard costs in comparison to your historical infrastructure. And we also deliver a number of sort of soft cost benefits as well. Things like users not having to suffer downtime, being able to collaborate, and things of that sort as well. And if you need 300 terabytes, we believe you should pay for 300 terabytes, and you should pay for it on a subscription. If you need 200 terabytes next year, you should pay less, and if you need more, you should pay more. What we don't believe you should pay for is the empty space that's typically bought in on-prem equipment for future growth, or the overheads, or the RAID overheads, or the snapshot reserves, or whatever extra stuff that might be. One customer I'm working with at the moment in Bristol, they have 460 terabytes of provisioned disk across their primary storage, their backups, their archive, their DR replicas. When we counted it all up, there was 460 terabytes of usable space. They are currently storing between 40 and 50 terabytes of file data in that. That is not uncommon. At some point, they got the deal of the century on 100 terabytes of usable space and then replicated it and backed it up and all that. And it turns out that that was not a really good investment for them. So, I think the reason that people are moving to the cloud now is that you really just pay for what your business needs. And if your business changes next year, look at the volatility we've gone through with the pandemic. If your business circumstances change next year, whether upwards or downwards, you can adjust your costs quite automatically to that change in circumstances. Now, of course, you guys are all in AEC, and we do a ton of work. I'll give you some examples in a minute of customers. where you have particular needs on top of just normal NAS. People want to collaborate, not only locally, but between different offices, perhaps around the world, with things like ArcGIS and AutoCAD and Revit and Bentley MicroStation, etc. Because we include a technology called global file locking in our solution, as well as the ability to synchronize files, we make that possible for people to do it that way. So just to wrap up, and then we can all have some more beer. We really do think that some of these things that I've touched on, such as always running out of disk space, needing separate backup copies, the time it takes to restore files, the complexity and the cost of traditional approach, really can be a lot smarter with an approach leveraging the cloud, which means that there's no limits on capacity, built-in backup and DR, the ability to restore in minutes, keep it simple, and reduce those costs. So just to finish off, some of you may be familiar with some of these companies I'm going to talk about now, which are Nasuni customers. For example, AECOM. I believe last time I checked, AECOM were the world's largest architecture, engineering, and construction company. They've got 170 locations worldwide. This slide's about 6 months out of date, but at that time, 3.2 petabytes of file data. And that's accessible now at all of those locations. So someone in Poughkeepsie can be changing a model that's being used to build a railway overpass in Kuwait, for example. And this has not only solved that problem of capacity and access to files, it's reduced the edge storage costs, like how much physical storage, backup and DR they had at each of these sites, by something like 90% in that case. Now, at that scale, you get even bigger returns than you do at a smaller scale. So we'll look at another example then, Perkins and Will. Some of you might know of them. They're a slightly smaller scale, 27 global offices, over a petabyte of file data. But now they've got one cloud storage solution globally. They no longer make separate backups of their file infrastructure. They no longer have to make separate DR copies. In their case, they're using Amazon, and in the previous case, actually, that was also Amazon. The next example is Microsoft. But it really doesn't matter what the object storage is. We're a multi-cloud technology. In fact, a number of our customers have benefited from being able to change which cloud storage provider they use at the back end over time, perhaps for commercial reasons or data sovereignty reasons or whatever, and not have to expose that to their team members who just keep accessing the files in the same way as before. And then one close to my heart, CPB out in Australia, because I do also run our sales in Asia Pac. CPB are a pretty big show out in Australia. They're half a petabyte, 100 million files in that environment, and now all of that is stored in Azure blob storage with Nasuni in front of it. The users, however, don't think that anything changed. They still go to their F drive or their G drive and they see all their files through their normal applications in the normal way. And that non-disruptive approach, we think, is quite helpful. So that's a few customers you can talk to. There's plenty of others. Don't take our word for it. If you go onto Gartner's peer review website, you'll find lots and lots of reviews about Nasuni and other technologies there. So you can just go and read about it. As I said, we've been around for 12 years. We do a ton of work with the hyperscalers for people not just in AEC, but in all sorts of industries. People as diverse as Coca-Cola and Adidas and Bechtel in oil and gas, Penguin Random House, if you read books, and Condé Nast if you read magazines, for example. And we'd love to help you as well. But that's enough from me. So what you could do if you wanted to, you could engage us for a demo. Lee and the team at Nephos can organise that. Customer reference calls. We like to do a business value assessment and proof of concept engagements where it makes sense. But most of all, cheers, everybody. Thanks for listening, and enjoy a pint on us. Thanks very much.
Yeah, so the last kind of part of this really was just a quick illustration, if you like, as to how this works in practice. So as I mentioned at the top, we're quite consulting led. We do a lot of work with customers to try and work out what the infrastructure should look like, what the real cost base is, all these sorts of good things. One of the things that we do quite frequently is our smart data storage service, and that's really all about working out what you've got, working out where you're trying to get to, and building out a strategy to enhance the infrastructure aspect, right? Now, whether that uses cloud, on-premise, combination of all of the above, that's kind of what we're doing. But the goal is to optimize that strategy. So I I'll give you a quick example. They're a global publishing firm that were actually on Andy's slide a couple of pictures before. But one of the things that we did with them, probably about 20, they've been a Nasuni customer for quite a while. They've been one of our customers for quite a while. One of the things that we've been working with them on more recently is kind of a broader migration to cloud and how they can leverage cloud, generally speaking. And that was really with the goal of improving collaboration, reducing costs, shutting down data centers, and trying to be a little bit more agile, right? I'm not going to talk you through all these pieces, don't worry. But ultimately, that's what they were trying to do. Now, what we managed to do in our approach was kind of simplify things, right? So we have identified through the process about 50% of their block workload that we could move into public cloud. So we moved that into AWS, left about 50% of the infrastructure, the virtual infrastructure that needed to stay on site. And some of that's things like store entry systems, print systems, because the print systems they use are about 1,000 years old and they're never going to be supported in public cloud. So there's various different things that had to stay on site, right? So what we've done is re-platform those onto Nutanix in their case. And we leverage that for that smaller footprint. We utilized a backup platform to then back that block environment up into AWS, which is their cloud of choice. So we've removed that from the equation as well. So we don't actually have to leave on site probably about 50% of the stuff that they've got. All of the file data, which is the bulk of their estate, when you think about publishers and what they, the amount of content they generate, it's actually not that dissimilar from you guys, really. There's a lot of it. It's quite high res. There's just a lot of content. So what we've done is we've taken the file infrastructure and pushed that back onto Nasuni, which then snaps into, originally it was Azure. We're actually going through a process right now, porting them from Azure to AWS for various reasons. But effectively what that's done is give them a split on these NAS devices on the Nasuni edge caches, where about 20% of the workload is hot and local. So users read write locally. All of their data is versioned up into the object store, so it's protected, so they don't need to back it up, which means we need to buy less of this block backup stuff because Nasuni protects that inherently. And then what we do is take that model and we replicate that across regions. 3 regions to them, APAC, US, and Europe. The big kicker for them is kind of twofold. One, it means they get to collaborate on print globally. So if they're releasing an issue of Vogue, for example, it means that they can have their creative department in one area, they can have brand in another area, and so on and so on. But they can all work on the same print schedule. They can all work on the same project. And the second piece is they wanted to regionalize their support. So they wanted centralized support of all of that infrastructure globally because it was too complex and it cost too much money to run, quite frankly. So Nasuni have this great ability to centrally manage all of these edge caches on a global basis, right? So you don't need to be popping into a Windows file server or a NAS device in every different location to go and manage that. You do it all centrally. The net impact of that was that when we modeled the numbers out, it meant we got to consolidate out the block storage, drop the footprint by about 50%. They shut a data center as a result of that. Gives us backup into cloud, give us DR in the cloud, gives us protection over our file data and central management. And that led to a 69% cost saving over 7 years. It's a massive, massive opportunity to streamline that infrastructure And they're not the only ones. If you look at people like WSP in the engineering space, we've run something similar in their environment globally. There's a number of customers out there that are taking advantage of this, and that's really what we're kind of trying to bring to bear, I guess. So with that in mind, as Andy says, I don't want to be the guy that stands between you and a beer.